We are here in the library of Geneva University's Medical Center to talk about a very important concept, which is executive functions, very central to ADHD. To talk about this concept, I've invited a colleague of mine. Her name is Fiona Journal. Hi, Fiona. Thanks for being here with us to talk about ADHD and specifically executive functions. You're a psychologist that's specialized in this topic. So what I'm going to ask you first is to give us a definition of executive functions and really why we talk about executive functions.
So executive function is a set of high-level cognitive functions that act as an orchestra conductor to coordinate other functions like language, memory, attention. So executive functions are used in every new situation, complex situation or unexpected situation. And these are tasks in which we have to direct our attention or make a decision or plan action to produce a goal. So it allows the integration of perception and experiences to reach this goal. For example, when I'm driving, I need to take into account the traffic sign, the pedestrian who might cross my road, and without paying attention to the conversation of my passenger. So with all that, I also need to shift my attentional focus between the traffic light that just came red and the car that become closer to me in the mirror. After that, I need to anticipate my direction and probably change them if I encounter like traffic jams on my trip.
Mm-hmm. Right, so that's an excellent example to give a kind of overview of all of what's involved in executive functions. Now let's look at some of the components precisely.
So the first model who described this component is the Miyake's model. And the first component is the inhibition. It's the ability to stop ourselves from producing an automatic response, a routine, and to discard all the information that are not relevant for the task we are doing. So we talked just earlier about the capacity to inhibit the attention to the conversation of our passenger. And we could also talk about a game in which we have to wait our turn. It's really difficult for children to wait the turn in game. And when you get older, the inhibitory control will develop, and so allow the child to be less impulsive and inhibit this comportment.
Excellent. So inhibition is really one of the first components of Miyake models, and then there's a couple more.
After that, we have the flexibility. Flexibility is the ability to move from a behavior to another in a fluid manner. So it allows one to adapt to new situations by changing activity or strategies. We have to adapt to new situations when we face unexpected events. Like a change of weather or the cancellation of an appointment. The third component is the working memory. It's a system of limited and temporary retention of information while we produce a task. So, for example, in conversation, we have to maintain the question to answer it in details. And these three components, so inhibition, flexibility, and working memory, are used in specific tasks, as we just say, but it's also they also interact together to coordinate all the higher level executive functions.
Okay, before we go to those higher level ones, let me just ask you a question concerning working memory, because we've talked about that earlier on. We talked about the central administrator in Badley's model. Would you say that this central administrator is within the executive functions, or what would you say?
Yes, partly. We just need to understand that Miyake specifies that inhibition and flexibility are independent functions that the central administrator will use together to process the goal.
Okay. Right, so on the basis of Miyake's model, inhibition, flexibility, and working memory, then we have even more complex executive functions. Yeah?
Exactly. Those functions are grouped in Diamond's model. There are reasoning, problem-solving, and planning abilities. These are functions that enable logical, inductive reasoning. So we could take 3 examples of those. It's initiation, planning, and multitasking. Initiation is the ability to start a task, to really engage in an activity. Planning is the ability to mentally anticipate an action, so to break it down in several steps. So we need that to plan the most efficient way to reach our goal. And multitasking is the ability to coordinate multiple activities simultaneously to reach the goal.
Okay. Well, we really see how that's quite relevant to daily life. Now, why don't we try to link all of these executive functions within an example that concerns ADHD?
Okay, take the example when we start the day. Our only desire is to stay under the blankets. So we have to inhibit this desire to initiate a new task. So people with ADHD could have difficulty to get active, to engage in a new task. After that, it's also necessary to change activities during our days in a flexible way. So we have to follow tasks without remaining stuck on the previous one. For example, we receive a phone call while we are working, and we are able to answer the phone call and to immerse ourselves in the conversation without thinking about all we were doing before.
Yeah, so that's like a complete switch, right? You got kind of get into the phone call, yeah.
And it could be difficult for people with ADHD to switch between activities like that. It could take slightly more time. In our day are guided by schedules. We need to do tasks in an order, more or less precise order. And to do so, we have to remember all the behavior to be produced, so to keep them in working memory, and after that, create the program. So anticipate the most efficient way to do them. It could be difficult for people with ADHD who could show a tendency to be often late or to not put things away. It's difficulty to organizing and planning.
Okay, so that's like a difficulty that really has to do with the combination of all of these executive functions. That's interesting.
And the last thing in our daily lives is that our activities most of them are multiple. So it's not uncommon to answer the phone while continuing the task we were doing. To do so, we need an organized management of materials, of time to all these activities, and we need to be flexible in the attention given for each activities. We can't be focused on all of them together. In ADHD, it's difficult to not forget elements, or it's possible to lose the track of the goal.
Okay, so multitasking is going to make it even more difficult to bind all of these executive functions, right? Okay, so that's really useful. Thanks, Fiona, because you've really been able to kind of very precisely pinpoint some of the elements that might pose a challenge in ADHD, but also to underline how, when we bind these together, we can have more success, and how, when there are difficulties at one of these levels, well, then it can become to increase the load, like in multitasking. So really, thank you for that. So with this topic on executive functioning, we're really able now to appreciate the complexity of these functions, the role that they play in daily life, and also all of the challenges that may come when some difficulties occur at different levels. And this is going to help us to understand how we create psychological interventions to help with these problems.